Hello and welcome to another episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is an old friend and colleague, Dr. Tom Watson. Tom currently serves as the System Chief for Thoracic Surgery at Corewell Health near Detroit in Michigan. Tom is a Midwestern boy born near Chicago, where he grew up. He went to did his undergraduate degree in Stanford in California, and became part of the USC esophageal gang, if you like. His big mentor in those days was Dr. Tom DeMeester, and he did his residency and fellowship in California before moving to Rochester in upstate New York in the late 90s. There he ultimately teamed up with another of the USC gang, Dr. Jeff Peters. In 2016, Tom moved to become Chief of Surgery and System Chief in MedStar, Georgetown University Hospital, and moved to his current position in 2021. I've known Tom for many years because we were in Rochester together, and in this conversation today, he discusses a lot of interesting aspects of a surgical career. A fascinating part of that discussion is the transition from a full-time clinical surgeon to one involved in a lot of administration and strategy. This is something that he found quite difficult, and I think listening to his challenges would be worthwhile for anyone considering such a move. He also describes how, in later years, he's developed a great interest in the concept of stoicism as a way of governing your life. So I hope you like the discussion with Tom today, and if you do, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and send us some comments if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, then do something similar, please. It's very helpful to know what you like. So without further ado, let's go over and talk to Tom. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives. So thank you so much for joining this this very modest little platform, which I call Surgeons' Lives, but
yeah,
what I also call it is Stuff That Matters.
yeah.
We do spend a little time talking about life and career, but I also like to spend a little time discussing what really matters to surgeons beyond the stuff that appears in your CV.
Sure.
So maybe you'd start in the way I ask everyone to start, which is just a little brief life history, starting with the words "I was born in."
Okay. Well, thanks, John. Yeah, I was born outside of Chicago, in suburban Chicago, and spent my childhood and high school years there, and consider myself a Midwestern boy. From there, I moved out to California for 16 years. I did college at Stanford, and I did my medical training at the University of Southern California. So 4 years of medical school, and then I decided I really liked California, so I opted to stay on there for my general surgery residency. And during general surgery, an interesting thing happened. In the middle of my residency, we got a new chairman there during my 4th year, a guy named Tom DeMeester, who's well known to anybody who works on the esophagus. He became our chairman and became my mentor. And because of that relationship, I opted to stay on after that to do a year of esophageal surgery fellowship with him. And he's the guy who convinced me if I wanted to work on the esophagus, I really should be board certified both above and below the diaphragm. So I stayed on there to do my cardiothoracic fellowship for a couple more years. So all said and done, I was 8 years at USC. I'm sorry, 12 years at USC, 4 years of school and 8 years of training. I finished that in 1996. And so then I was a young guy looking for a practice doing esophageal surgery, and the right opportunity for me at that moment was in Rochester, New York, University of Rochester. So I moved myself from sunny LA to snowy Rochester, New York. And in the fall of 1996, the partner who brought me on sent me a letter during the interview process saying how they'd gotten like 26 inches of snow there that day. And I knew I'd be looking forward to that when I got up there. But Rochester turned out to be just a gem, and the best move of my life. And even though people told me I was crazy to do that, it really was just a wonderful place to be, a great place to have a young family, and great place professionally speaking. And so I was there for 20 years,
Yeah, of
and
course.
I was there from 1996 to 2016,
Yeah.
and kind of did my academic thing there, rose through the ranks from assistant professor to associate to full professor, and eventually became the chief of thoracic surgery there. And then an interesting opportunity, kind of a sidestep in my career, arose when I got interviewed for a position in Washington, D.C. for an organization, MedStar Health, to be their system chief of surgery. And that seemed like a new challenge and an interesting thing. So I moved to D.C. in 2016, and I did that for just about 4 or 5 years. And that turned out to have some issues with it that I'm happy to elaborate on. But, it turned out not to be the best career move for me. And an opportunity arose outside of Detroit, where I currently am situated, in an organization that was called Beaumont Health. We were
Yes.
bought out and consolidated with another healthcare system in Western Michigan a couple of years back, and we're now called Corewell Health. I've got my paraphernalia on here. We have 8 hospitals in the Detroit area and a bunch of hospitals out in Western and Southern Michigan. So I've been here now for 3 years, and I'm as the system chief of thoracic surgery. So that's my brief kind of CV.
And also, Corewell, I think, is in Illinois as well, because I have a former faculty from Florida who's in Illinois in Corewell Health as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that's a little bit different, John, because I think Corewell's it was a merger of 2 Michigan healthcare systems, one called Spectrum and one called Beaumont, and now it's Corewell. Yeah.
So now, disclaimer, I mean, I've known you for a long time, since when I went to Rochester in 2008, and we share some experiences. And I think that it was me that put the MedStar people onto you.
Yes, that is true.
Good and bad, good and bad.
Yeah.
But I'll go back a bit. We both served under the whatever you want to refer to, the tutelage and mentorship of Jeff Peters, who of course was a mentee of Tom DeMeester.
Yes, and had been one of my faculty members during my residency and fellowships. Yes.
Exactly. And Tom DeMeester, of course, was, it just shows how the world is small, was, linked to the esophageal story in Chicago,
Yes.
Which was
David Skinner's
David
origin.
Skinner, and from Ireland, Jerry O'Sullivan, of course, who was there for a while, one thing or another. And, I remember having I should ask, would you consider Tom DeMeester to be your surgical idol, or
Yes.
or did you have one?
No, he definitely was. I mean, there's no question, if I had to pick one person who was the biggest influence on my professional career, is Tom DeMeester. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And he put me in a path, not only in terms of subject matter, being an esophageal surgeon, but on a path of an academic surgical career. Prior to my engagement with him, if you'd asked me what I was going to do, I would have said I'm going to be a community general surgeon in Southern California. That was kind of the path I was leading toward. And then he took me in a completely different direction, and I'm so fortunate that he did, because I benefited from that.
So the reason I ask you that was because, I think each in their own way, all of those individuals were, remarkably high achievers. Of course, they did it in a way over the generations that, perhaps wouldn't fly today. I mean, and
yeah, it was a different culture back then.
Yeah.
And that's true, of course, across the country. Tom DeMeester is a product of the Hopkins General Surgery tradition, as is Jeff Peters, and that was a certain culture. And that culture, I think, permeated a lot of organizations. And a lot was expected of us, a lot of our time, all of our intensity and effort. And Tom DeMeester was no exception to that rule. But he also gave back, and he was there for me when I needed him, professionally and personally. And so he had my back. And so it was, where much is expected, much is given, or whatever the saying is. It's something along those lines. And those guys were all of that ilk, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Jeff will probably never watch this, but even if he did, I'm sure he wouldn't object to me saying this. I remember him saying to the faculty in Rochester one day, this is what my boss told me to do. And, I always told me to do this. And, it was something that didn't really go down very well with the faculty at the time, as
Sure.
sometimes happened with Jeff, if you recall. And I
Sure.
remember saying to him afterwards, I used to act as his sounding board sometimes. And I remember saying to him, you really shouldn't advocate somebody as the example of wonderfulness who people, would consider maybe a bit of an ass, whatever, who was trained by one, who was trained by one,
Yeah.
And really, that was my naivety to some extent, recognizing that, or not recognizing that, these were men and not women, of course. They were men of their time, I guess. And that, what went on in the 70s, doesn't go on now,
No.
90% of the time, nor would it be permitted. Do you mourn at all for the loss of just some of that?
Oh God, no. No, I that's all for the better. And I think back of just, I'm going to be honest, I've got emotional scars from the experience, even though I benefited a lot from it. As I said, I was sincere in saying that my whole career benefited from it, but you pay a price for it.
Yeah.
Emotionally, and that's all for the better, that people aren't having to pay that price now like we used to. Yeah.
So just to go back all the way, was there medicine and surgery or in your family or not? Or where did
No, I'm the first one. My dad still alive, but he's a retired attorney.
that?
Told me, don't do two things: don't do the law and don't do medicine. He thought lawyers and doctors were all messed up. I only half listened to him. Yeah. So end up in medicine for no particular reason, no particular family or friend influence.
Do you have a reason why you did medicine, or at least one that
I
you
thought about
decided
that
to
for
tell
decades, and
people?
I still don't have an answer. I find it meaningful. I say that in jest. For me, it's the ultimate challenge, mentally, intellectually, emotionally, personality wise. What we do as surgeons, there's no career that I can think of that where you match the 360-degree demands on us, and it never gets old. You never are master of it. You never feel like you completely know your specialty, and so that's what keeps us going. It's never boring. And yeah, I think that's what really
Very
got
true.
to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it is very true. And despite what people bemoan and complain about, it pays pretty well, for what you do. It's hard work and there's a lot of responsibility and stress, but there are worse things to do in life, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Mm. So you said in the early days you had thought that maybe you would just be a community general surgeon, and then Tom DeMeester pulled the veils away from your eyes or opened your eyes to a different career. When you left USC to go to Rochester, can you remember what your ambition was at that time? What did you want to be? What did you see?
Right. Yeah. I wanted to be an academic esophageal surgeon. That's really what my focus was. And so I was looking for jobs where it was a good fit, where they were looking for that person. And that just happened to be Rochester, New York. My thoracic surgical colleagues in Rochester were looking for just that. And interestingly, they hadn't really advertised that, but without saying it, they wanted to see kind of what surfaced, and I happened to surface, and it was a good fit. But yeah, that's what I was looking for.
So now, 20 years later, what is your ambition now?
Yeah, it's funny because I've had three different positions in my time after training, and sometimes your job fits the needs of the position, and not all positions are, of course, the same. You're always trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, I tell our trainees, and so the job requirements here and outside of Detroit are a little bit different than my job requirements in both DC and in Rochester. So for me, I'm still trying to master thoracic surgery and all of its components. I find that still the ultimate challenge, and ever changing, right? Since you and I were in training and we were doing most things open, we lived through a minimally invasive era of laparoscopy and thoracoscopy, and now it's robotics and it's an endoscopic things, and it's just constantly evolving. And I think that's still an ultimate challenge to really feel like you know all of that stuff. And I've become more of a lung surgeon, interestingly, here in Detroit, because that was the practice I walked into. They had a big lung practice. They didn't have such a developed esophageal one. And so I'm finding myself doing more lung surgery now than foregut surgery. And that may change over time, but that's the situation I inherited.
Adapt or die.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, I sometimes ask people what's been the big change, 20 years ago plus, and my original mentor was sadly no longer with us, a remarkable man called Tom Hennessy in Dublin, who was a big esophageal guy. And I remember, because I lived through that with him as a medical student, as an intern and a junior resident, etc. If the patients survived the surgery, they still died of the cancer. I mean, the outcome was bad. It wasn't good.
Of course.
It's still not a great cancer to get. But
the survival's notched up, but it's still not a good one.
Yeah, but it's very different. Do you see that? Do you see, it becoming a manageable disease with early detection and immunotherapy and
yes, exactly. There's these incremental improvements, and of course, early detection / prevention are always going to be key, but that's still frustratingly rare.
Yeah.
And so now we're talking about better multimodality therapies, not just esophagectomy. And when I was coming through training with Tom DeMeester, there really wasn't effective adjuvant or neoadjuvant therapy at all. So was to cut is to cure, and doing bigger and more radical operations was therefore better. But nowadays we do a little bit less aggressive surgery, but we have better adjuvants, chemotherapy, radiation, and immunotherapy. And I think that's going to continue to lead the way. It's not going to be changes in surgical technique. I mean, yes, we can do things better, slightly better with minimally invasive operative techniques, but at the end of the day, that's not going to necessarily change the cure rate for the cancer.
Yeah. It's biology is king, of course, as always. Yeah. So you and I have spoken about this before, and we both share a degree of this life experience of success and what I'll refer to harshly as failure, but at least an experience that wasn't as expected, et cetera, et cetera. For the education of folks out there, talk to me a little bit about, there you were in Rochester, riding a high, well-known, big-time esophageal practice, and a practice that was highly respected around the country. Now was your move, and of course, so you made the move to, if you like, the next step up, and it wasn't a great experience for you to some extent. Can you share a little bit of the frustrations or what you found about that?
Yeah, it really was a change in trajectory, going into a much more administrative role and leading a large multi-hospital department of surgery. And there, and you find it's not always what you would expect it to be, and it's got its own challenges. And one of the things I would say this for people who are looking to do that sort of thing, you step into a very political arena that you're more sheltered from as a busy clinician. As a surgeon in the trenches, so to speak, you learn, you've spent your whole career training to do that, and you get good at it, and what your metrics of success are. If you're good at it, right? How many cases you're doing, your outcomes, yada yada yada. You know how to play, how to live within a hospital, how to get along with people. You know the game, and what the metrics are of the game. How you're being evaluated in the day. And then you go into a leadership position, and the rules totally change. The skill set is totally different. The metrics for how that skill set is assessed are nebulous, not well defined, and very, very different. And that can be frustrating. I found that very frustrating. Who's assessing me and what are the metrics and who am I there to please? And am I answering up or answering down? I'm in the middle. Who are you ultimately trying to answer to? And that depends, your success and your happiness in that depends largely on the culture.
So
And
was that at least in part because you didn't ask at the beginning in terms of, what are the expectations, what are the rules, what are the ground rules, etc. Was that an example of just mismatched expectations
I
or
would say that it was a bit of mismatched expectations, not clearly delineated
yeah,
expectations, and lack of feedback as you go along as to where you're supposed to be.
yeah.
And yeah,
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you're MBA'd. Is that correct?
correct. I'm not, no.
So, and I'm not suggesting this would have, is
Not a fiscal thing. It wasn't an MBA
no.
kind of thing at
So,
all.
but looking back, if you were to be in 3 months' time, about to take a similar job in 3 months' time, would you do something different?
I would spend as much time and energy as I could understanding the culture of the organization and whether it's a healthy culture or an unhealthy
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
I've witnessed both.
Yeah.
You can't change an unhealthy culture. And it's really hard to be happy if the culture's not happy. Those would be my words.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And are you a believer that culture comes from the top?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It has to. The culture has to be driven from the top, because you can have well-intended people not at the top and they're going to get squashed by the top.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm guessing you would probably agree that that's the same within a department of surgery.
It's anywhere. And
Yeah.
that's been the learning lesson, for me, John, is that culture drives things. I remember when you and I were in Rochester, were together, you handed out a book to a bunch of people called The No Asshole Rule.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that book, and I think that book stands out in my mind, as some truth there. Yeah.
I still do, by the way. I keep ordering them and I keep giving them to fellows and faculty, and some people read them. I suspect some people don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always say to people that, the reason I'm such a fan of that book is because when I first read it myself, I realized I didn't score very well. you know, to some extent, Bob Sutton was talking about me, and sometimes that just comes with time. So now you've gone back to, if you like, your safety, your culture, your comfort
Yeah.
zone. Um,
Yeah.
and all is going well. So,
Yeah.
would you say that if I was a young surgeon starting off tomorrow, you would be optimistic for me, or would you be worried for me?
I mean, just in terms of how the profession of surgery is looking in
Yes.
the next 10, 20.
Yes.
Oh, I think there's still lots of reason for optimism. I think about this a lot because you hear about in the news AI and all the rapid
Yeah.
developments in that. And I think some specialties are at real risk for AI kind of really changing their job or getting rid of their job. I think about certain things like radiology or maybe dermatology that could be
Yeah.
really challenged by AI, but I don't see AI coming in and taking away surgery anytime soon. I think that's not going to happen, at least in my professional lifetime. And I think that's many iterations off. So I think there's always going to be a role for surgeons, and even if these magic bullets come down the pike one of these days that cure cancer, I think there's always going to be a role for surgeons in both the cancer arena and in the non-cancer arenas in which we all live. So I think it's a great time to be a surgeon, and the technology keeps getting better and the
Yeah.
robotics and everything. I think it's really fascinating, and I find it challenging still.
So
Sometimes
you are. Uh, we'll be generous and say that you're at the peak of your career.
there you go. That's very generous.
Um, what's been the biggest difference from the day you walked into USC to now in terms of surgery?
Oh gosh, just the minimally invasive surgery.
Right.
Back then, when I started my internship in 1988, and the first lap Coley was done when in the world, in the late 80s, I think, and then the
Yeah.
first lap Nissen was done, I think, 1991 in Belgium, and then in the United States around 1992. And so, it's just been this minimally invasive surgical explosion. And but I feel fortunate that I came through being trained in the open days and now in the minimally invasive days. I do worry that the surgeons nowadays don't know how to do an open operation, and that's going to be a challenge when they need to do it.
And that's been, I mean, I think many people would agree that that's been the biggest sort of plus for the patients and across the board. Would you have an obvious negative, that you look back in the last 20 years or 20 plus, 20, 30 years and say, that's bad, what's happened?
I mean, in terms of how the field has changed.
You choose, your dealer's
Yeah,
choice.
no, I don't see a lot of bad. Like we talked about earlier, I think the cultural changes within surgery are a positive. Heck, so many more women are in surgery now, and that's a good thing. They've changed the requirements during residency to allow people to have families and have time off
Right.
for the childbirth and whatnot, and that's all good. Um, so no, I don't see any real negatives. It's just it's gotten so hard, to be really well trained at something. You've really got to decide where your focus is going to be. I do worry in a 5-year general surgery residency that's just barely enough time to
Yeah.
kind of scratch the surface. And if you want to be really good at something, you need some additional training.
You know, I talk to people on this podcast from different countries in the world, and one of the unifying characteristics is that, most people would say that the negative that they see is the administrative load and the impact of electronic medical records, and it distills down into when people retire or give up or whatever, they distill it down into the statement, "I've had enough."
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think things like the electronic medical record are a two-edged sword, because we want them to, of course, help us, and we can't forget that they do help us in ways that are really profound. But yeah, they do add burden as well. And gosh, I remember when I was back in Rochester, we had a meeting with the chief of the medical group, and I was just saying, I feel like a monkey in clinic having to punch so many buttons to sign off on this and sign off on that. And you do that over and over and over and over and over again, and it really wears on you. Now that can be mitigated, and it has been mitigated, and I think will continue to improve. But um, so yeah, there's a downside, but we can't forget the good side either. I mean, we can pick up a Dragon software now and dictate a note like nothing. And we used to
Yeah.
have to either type or use a transcription service. For every negative, I can think of a positive. So in balance, yeah, there's some more administrative burden, but that hasn't really been the thing that doesn't bring me down, honestly, too much.
So, and we're not at the end, but we're gonna shift a little in terms of the non-surgery side of things. But do you have any regrets in life at this point?
None. No, I'm sure lots of regrets. And I wish I had some of those years back when I was younger, just working like a dog all the time. And you give up. Back in our generation, John, we gave up our later 20s and early 30s for residency, and you just were trying to survive and hold on. And for many years in my early time as an attending, I felt the same way, just trying to hold on, trying to get the work done and trying to raise a young family. I got a bunch of kids, and you're just trying to get through that time. And I feel like it's taken me till into my 50s. I'm in my early 60s now, to I can really kind of enjoy life a bit. It took way too long. And that would be my main thing.
So, I'm all of that applies to me, and more. Um, but I see people who are not the so-called Gen Z people, they're our age, who are just better at life than I was, and maybe to an extent you were. So I mean, is that just because we weren't good at it and it took until we were 50 or 60 to realize what was important, stuff that
Yeah,
matters? Because,
yeah,
none of
yeah,
this esophageal stuff or colorectal stuff or being chairman of this or president of that, none of that matters, really.
yeah, I know. And I think a lot about that. Maybe a psychoanalyst would be the best one to kind of tell me where my strengths and weaknesses are. I do think I'm a fault of this, and I think a lot of people are. We get to where we got or have gotten by saying yes. And you sometimes I think I was too afraid to say no, and I've become better at saying no. And no is a very powerful word. And I think when I was younger, I was so afraid that unless I said yes, it was going to be a slippery
Yeah.
slope to
Yeah.
not get to where I wanted to be. And that was that's the mistake I made, was not being forceful enough at saying no, and picking the things that really were meaningful to me and not burdening myself with the things that were less meaningful to me. And I'm
I,
still learning that. I think we all continue to fight that
we,
out.
we're both victims of what nowadays people call FOMO.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I see that a lot, and people complain and bemoan about the attitudes of Gen Z, the Gen Z generation or the internet generation, but they have a lot of stuff that they have right, for
yes,
sure. And I also, it's always struck me that surgeons, because of the nature of the business, are pretty uni-skilled individuals a lot of the time. And therefore, the only way they know how to succeed is just by volume and effort. Uh,
yes,
they're not very good at diversifying into different things.
yes.
So they just do, I'll do more and more and more of that.
My observation as surgeons is that that's their source of pride and identity. And if your source of pride is the number of hours you put in at work in a week, then you're not going to try
Yeah.
to decrease the number of hours you put in at work in a week. And so yeah, it's a slippery. That's a tough trap to get sucked into.
So it's as though you read the script. So now I can pivot and ask you,
All right.
so
Yeah.
here you are in your early 60s, and what have you done about that in
Yeah.
terms of how is your life different from, let's say, the Tom Watson I met almost 20 years ago?
Sure. Luckily when I was a kid, I was exposed to a lot of different fun stuff. Did a lot of sports, and I did a lot of music. And those were the big parts of my childhood and teen years and even into college, music and sports. And then those things all got kind of shoved aside for a good 20 years. I mean, from the time I was probably in college or late in college, then into medical school, and then till when I was into my attending years. And luckily I resurrected some of those passions from my younger days. So for me, the sports are tennis and golf more than anything else. Some others, but those are the main ones. And then music. I'm a piano player and I'm a bass player. And I spend time now regularly pursuing more than one of those things, pretty much on a daily basis. And then, of course, just spending more time with my family and enjoying my kids as they've gotten older and become young adults, and that's been fun.
And if I recall correctly, you have a daughter who's a bit of a sports star as well.
Yeah, so my oldest is 28, and she went to Stanford and she played field hockey there,
Yeah.
and that was a big part of her upbringing, and that was a big part of her life, and it was a good thing. Yeah, and then I've got 6 kids. I got 3 other daughters, all of who play lacrosse, or have been playing lacrosse, and my sons run and play other sports. But yeah, sports have always been a big part.
So other than being a bass player, and bass players are always considered slightly strange.
Of
Uh,
course.
yeah, just a step away from the drummer,
The non-musicians in the band.
Is there is there something that we don't know about you that you could tell us?
That's implied by being a bass player.
That's apart from being a bass player. Apart from being a bass player, is there something that we don't know about you that people would say, I never knew that about Tom Watson?
Not really. No, I think I'm pretty much, you get what you see, or see what you get. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to ask you some slightly left field questions that are profoundly unrelated to esophageal surgery.
Yeah.
And just there's no right or wrong answer, of course, which is one of the joys of this. So let's start with asking you, what happens when we die?
What happens when we die?
Yeah.
I think we get reincarnated as somebody else. I mean, there's somebody's got to be the souls of all those other people in the universe. So why not? Why wouldn't it be me or you?
And if you were coming back, uh, who or what would you like to come back as?
Geez, these are tough questions, man.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
I feel fortunate, to be doing what I do in the United States of America, and that small percentage of people that lives the quality of life that we all lead. I wouldn't mind coming back doing the same thing all over again. I don't feel like I made a mistake along the way and would rather be doing something else. Otherwise, I'd be doing that something else. So for me to say I want to come back as such and such would really be kind of silly, because I'd be going and doing that right now. So I'd be happy
Well,
coming back to what I'm doing.
so that prompts me to ask you, if you weren't a surgeon, what would you be?
Yeah, it's a good question. My fork in the road was back when I was in college trying to decide if I wanted to do medicine, because I didn't have any medical people in my family, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted. In fact, my roommate's father, who was a dentist, accused me and my roommate, who both went to medicine. The only reason we went into medicine was because we didn't want to go out and get a job, and there was probably some truth there at the
Yeah.
time. But I was actually an economics major and a biology major, and I was trying to decide whether I want to go to business school. So I've always thought, did I make the right choice going into medicine, or should I have gone into business school? And I think my personality and my skill set's better suited for medicine. But I still think about that a lot. There's so much interesting business aspects of medicine, and so many ways you can impact society on a grander scale within the business of medicine, that's something that still I think about a lot. How can I get into that arena? And as I get older, and it's going to be physically harder to stand all day doing surgeries and all, is there something business part that would be meaningful? So that's very much on my mind.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple of surgeons who, in the later years of their life, went into politics, and
Mm-hmm.
what I mean by politics is mainstream politics,
Yeah,
government level politics, and they both will tell you that what we do makes a difference to thousands of lives over a career. What they do potentially makes a difference to millions of lives.
absolutely.
And that's the attraction.
Absolutely.
And I can see that for sure. So, favorite food?
Favorite food, I'm going to say the Walker Brothers apple pancake from my childhood favorite restaurant in suburban Chicago.
Well, that's an interesting answer, because I have precisely zero idea what that is.
I'll send you a picture. It's a thing about the size of a plate and about this thick, that's gooey, with apples and pastry and cinnamon on it, and it's got about 10,000 calories.
I
And
was going to say
I don't
that's
know how much sugar's in there, but always my
immediate
favorite.
type 2 diabetes within the one sitting.
If you're not a diabetic before you walk into the restaurant, you're probably one when you walk out.
Now, with these when this podcast goes out on an audio version, of course, but also goes out on YouTube, and I never know who's watching or listening.
Sure.
Nor do I know, are they watching or listening in the morning or at the night. So I'm going to have to take a chance and say that I'm hoping people recognize that we are recording this in the early evening, so it's legitimate for me to have a glass of wine.
How good for you.
So here
I'm
is
in my office at work, so it's not legitimate for me to
well,
be having a glass of wine just yet when I
just
get
between
home.
you and me, it's fine. But the question is, beer or wine?
Wine. I'm a wine guy. Yeah.
Now, so you're having a glass of wine at your Friday evening dinner gathering at home, and you have two spare seats in your dinner party. You can have any two people from history, alive or dead, to fill the two vacant seats. Who would they be?
you know, it's interesting when I moved to DC, I found this interest in American history that I didn't have before. And so because it's all around you there.
Yes,
So,
yes.
and I've really taken up a study of American history and the American presidents. So I think about those people first, and some of the people like Abe Lincoln and FDR, Roosevelt. I think they were extremely important leaders in our country at critical times in our country's history. So they're the first two names that come to mind. I suppose JFK would be a third. Yeah.
So you're going with the politicians.
Yeah.
I interviewed somebody who said he would like Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela, and we we wondered whether the two great pacifists of the 20th century might have ended up in a fight during.
Yeah.
Best book ever.
Best book ever. Yeah. So again, I'm gonna go back to my American history thing, because this is what I've been reading a lot of lately. It's called The People's History. I'm blanking on the author's name. It's this really thick book, but it talks about the history of the United States from the perspective of the people who didn't win. You know, history is always told by the winners. So the people's history is all told from the perspective of, how about, say, the Native Americans who got killed off by the invading Europeans? What's their kind of take on things? And it goes through the whole perspective of that. I found that really fascinating. It gives you much more empathy for the societies that lost by westernization of the United States.
In addition to history being written by the winners, I was taught by a mentor many years ago that the minutes are always written by the winners as well.
That's the same idea. Yeah, and that book really made me think a lot about how we got to where we are as a country. And it's not always what the kids are told in school, right?
No.
It's very different.
It is, and to a degree, it's like that aphorism that says, people who like sausages and the law should not see either made.
Yes.
Sometimes it's pretty ugly. So if you're not reading your favorite book, then what would your favorite movie be?
Shawshank Redemption. I've watched that movie probably 20 times. I think it's just brilliantly done.
Who is the character with whom you identify?
Oh, the main guy, Andy.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
He's the guy.
Andy Dufresne. Yeah.
You're not the Morgan Freeman character following on.
No, I'm Andy Dufresne. I'm not as tall as him, but they downplay that in the movie.
So what would you like to have played at your funeral, music-wise?
Yeah, the kind of music that my band played when I was in college. So in college, I that's what I did. And that's kind of how I paid for my spending money in college, was in bands. And that was a lot of fun. And those are kind of the best times of my life. So I was in jazz bands and I was in rock bands. And the rock bands at that time, in the early 80s, were things, there you go, U2 and some of the British Invasion stuff from that time. And so I'd probably pick something from that generation, decide which one I'm going to.
Yeah, people who know me for years know that my kids know that, my family know that, apart from the usual traditional stuff at a funeral, that they have to play the Beatles' Rocky Raccoon at my funeral.
Now, why that?
The lyrics are extraordinary. There's a touch of genius about which Paul Simon has and Paul McCartney has. There's a line in it that says, her name was McGill. She called herself Lil, but everyone knew her as Nancy.
Right. So random.
Where does that come from?
Right, sure. It's funny.
What would you like written on your epitaph, as an epitaph on your gravestone?
He tried his best.
That's fair enough.
I'm always trying my best. Not always succeeding, but I'm always trying my best.
We're back to managing expectations.
Yeah.
So the last question I want to ask you is, how would you look for the rest of your life in 5 words? And you can't say, I will try my best.
Yeah, I'm going to say with peace and sincerity. Just that my actions and my vision align, and that's what brings peace at the end of the day, and that's what I'm shooting for now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've interviewed people of different ages and levels of, where they are retired or before retirement, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm sure there's a statistical analysis that would show that people, as they, reach their more mature years, they stop wanting to be president of this and they stop wanting to invent that, and they just want to be remembered and recognized and achieve as a decent human being.
Yeah.
It's
I've
not.
recently discovered stoicism, and with a fervor that I didn't necessarily embrace it before, but I really believe in the whole concept of just self-improvement and tuning out everything else, tuning out whatever else is thinking about you, what everybody else is, all the things you worry about from day to day, and just work on self-improvement.
Is
That's
it
what it's all
is
about.
it legitimate to be fervently stoic?
Yeah, I do. Yes, it is. Yeah, in the term of stoicism, that word stoic can be used in different ways, but I think
Sure.
the tenet of stoicism is that you just work on self-improvement and forget about all this other nonsense. And there's lots of wisdom there, and I think it brings one peace and gets
Yeah,
me to where I said that that's kind of that peace and sincerity.
I've often said to people over the years, particularly in our administrative lives, that, nothing that you do today really matters.
Right.
Number one. Number two, there's for sure a truism in healthcare in terms of healthcare administration. You can go away for 2 weeks, and when you come back in 2 weeks, nothing will have happened. So, just don't worry about it,
Yeah.
etc. So, well, Tom, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your day. Let you go home to your family.
Thank
I
you, John.
appreciate
Yeah.
it. And it's been great to catch up with you. And I hope it'll be a little shorter since before we meet again.
Thank you, John. It's great that you're doing this, and I appreciate the chance to be a participant. So thank you, and best to you always, and hope things are going well for you.